Hi. Well, I am really excited about this because hospice is my first love in social work. I've done a lot of things before social work. I've done a lot of things in social work, but when I started at graduate school many years ago, hospice was where I was working as a volunteer coordinator. And then when I graduated, I became a hospice medical social worker and administrator. So this program means a lot to me. It's very close to my heart. So just to spend a few minutes and talk to you about the basics of how it works is a thrill for me today. So I hope you catch the bug and are excited about hospice as well. So the modern history of hospice started with this lady, Dame Cicely Saunders, in 1960s England. She was a nurse and she saw what happened with people who were undergoing treatments, medical treatments, and then there was a lot of activity, a lot of care being given, a lot of disciplines involved, and then when it was decided that there was nothing more they could do, just everything stopped. They were told, you can go home, there's nothing more we can do for you. And she said, there's got to be something better than this. There's got to be something more. And so she went and became a social worker, developed some more holistic principles for end-of-life care, and started St. Christopher's Hospice in London. After that, she then went back and became a doctor. So she was really all in on caring for patients at the end of life. Hospice started in the US in the 1970s, came over the pond, and it was solely a volunteer organization. So doctors, nurses, social workers, everyone, chaplains, everyone volunteered their time. In 1983, Medicare began a hospice benefit. And since that time, the number of people using hospices really climbed exponentially. The reason that Medicare took it on, and now many insurance companies do as well, is that it saves money. It's been determined that the bulk of medical care costs are incurred in the last 6 months of life. And that's why hospice came about to end some of the unnecessary aggressive treatment and to provide more appropriate and economical treatment. But, insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, they're all about saving money. So that is the impetus for this, but the end result has been rather wonderful. So these are the latest figures that I've gotten from the NHPCO, and this was their facts and figures from 2020, which were statistics from 2018. So they're a little bit lagging, but there's been a steady increase in hospice utilization. And in 2018, more than half of all Medicare deaths in the US received hospice care. And in Texas alone, utilization was over 53% that year. The length of stay, however, is somewhat disappointing. Now, as I mentioned earlier, hospice is for the last 6 months of life. A doctor has to certify that someone has, in his or her opinion, a life expectancy of 6 months or less. However, more than a third, or almost a third actually, of Medicare patients in 2018 were on hospice for 7 days or less. And the average time for a Medicare patient to be on hospice that year was a little less than 90 days. So there's lots of reasons for that. One is that, doctors are hesitant to suggest that someone come on hospice. They don't want to hurt people's feelings. They don't want to have those difficult conversations. And also, some doctors see hospice as a failure, even though 100% of their patients will someday die. They, want to do as much as they can to give as much time to their patients, which is understandable. There's cultural implications with why someone might not come onto hospice earlier, but I will say that for the most part, what I've heard from families is that they never say, oh, we did this too soon. They usually say, I wish that we had come onto hospice much sooner. I wish we had done this a while ago. So who qualifies for hospice? Well, as I said, you have to have a terminal illness where curative treatment is no longer an option, that there's no, the physicians and everyone involved are in agreement that curative treatment is no longer feasible. Hospitalization then is replaced by hospice treatment in the patient's home. The person will, what they're giving up is going back and forth to the hospital. What they're gaining is appropriate care right where they are. So a patient's home may be in their home or apartment where they live with their family or where they live on their own, or it may be in a nursing home, it may be in a group home, it may be in a personal care home, wherever that patient calls home, that's where they will receive their care. That's where they will receive hospice care. It's when comfort care is desired. The main focus of hospice is comfort. Comfort from physical pain, comfort from spiritual and emotional pain. All of those things are addressed in hospice. But curing is no longer the goal. Comfort is the goal. And as I said, two physicians have to certify that the life expectancy, if the disease process follows its normal course, will be 6 months or less. So to address the needs of the patient, all of those comfort needs that I mentioned, hospice takes an interdisciplinary team approach. And this is not only traditionally a hospice program, how hospice programs were designed even back in the 60s and 70s. It's also part of Medicare regulations, and most insurance companies follow Medicare regulations. So the regulations of the insurance companies and the US government are that all of these people need to be on a hospice team. Everything is done under the orders of a hospice physician. The team is led by a registered nurse who is also the case manager for each patient. There's a hospice aide who provides care, hygiene care, those kinds of things, sometimes light housekeeping. A licensed master social worker in the state of Texas, they must be licensed and they must be MSWs. A spiritual counselor, which some people call a chaplain, but the requirements for that are less specific in that each agency has latitude to create their own definition of what their spiritual counselor is and what their requirements are. But they are required to have someone on staff that's addressing spiritual concerns for the patient. Volunteers are a part of the interdisciplinary team, and the state and federal government require that 5% of hospice care be provided by volunteers. So they are an integral part of the team. And then other contracted services like durable medical equipment, beds or walkers or wheelchairs, those kinds of things, pharmacy, PT and OT, So all of those are considered part of the interdisciplinary team. So hospice unit of care is not just the patient, it's the patient and the whole family. Now, of course, the medical care is centered around the patient, but particularly what the social worker, the volunteer, the spiritual counselor are focused on providing support for the entire family system. So because what affects the patient affects the family, and what affects the family is going to, matter to how the patient progresses and how the patient is, compliant with medication or, alleviating some of their pain. So the unit of care is the whole family, and the family is who the patient defines as family. Sometimes it's traditional, what you would consider traditional, and sometimes it is not. I had one of my very first hospice patients before I was even an MSW was a young lady in her 50s who lived in a nursing home, had been abused by her parents, had been abused by her spouse, had no one except she had a very dear friend who lived across town and who took Metrolift to see her every week. That is who she defined as her family. And so we did what we needed to do to help her, make sure that legally, her friend was in a position to make decisions if she couldn't, and we will talk about that in a minute. But that was who we, treated as her family. Sometimes it's a spouse and children. Sometimes it's a parents and children. And sometimes it's a community. I had one patient who lived by herself in an apartment complex, and we were worried about how she was going to care for herself as she deteriorated. But that apartment complex, all those people there pitched in, and they took turns on shifts and everything, and it was a beautiful thing. So I've said enough, but it's whoever the patient determines is their family. That's who we serve. Services provided: pain and symptom management, medications and medical equipment, education for the family on how to care for the patient at the end of life. We do a lot of teaching about what to expect, what you may have already seen and what is maybe coming, especially when you get to the last few days. And some of the physical symptoms may be alarming, and just being able to normalize them really helps the family to cope. Emotional and spiritual support for the patient and the family, referring for resources, particularly social workers do that. If there's a need for funeral homes, for anything like SNAP benefits or other things, we do a lot of those resource referral, and then grief support for the family up to 13 months after the death of the patient. So hospice stays in contact with the family if they so choose to, if the family chooses to, for up to 13 months to provide that additional support. The thing about hospice is that it is holistic care, as you can see from the types of disciplines that are involved. And this is now kind of seeping into many other areas of medical care, even on a primary practice level. If you go into your doctor's office, a lot of times you'll find at least referrals to mental health and spiritual health, and always assessing and asking questions. But it started with hospice, at least from what I've seen, that the person is seen as a whole person, mind, body, spirit, and social. And that is the goal, is to address all those things and to create a time of meaning. One of the NHPC, or the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, one of their themes is it's not about how you die, it's about how you live. And our hospice patients aren't dead yet. And we try to, emphasize that this is a beautiful, holy, it can be a beautiful, holy time in your life, to create your legacy, to keep making memories, and to say what needs to be said. And hospice gives that opportunity. I had one parent who died on hospice and one who died suddenly and was not on hospice. And the difference at the end of life was, very stark. And so, again, it's a meaningful organization. And I say that, small O organization, program. Who pays for it? Well, as I said, Medicare Part A, and that's the part of Medicare that pays for your hospital. So instead of going to the hospital, you get hospice services. Medicaid, which is a state program. So Medicare is based on age and disability. Medicaid is based on income and resources. Private insurance, most private insurance companies have a hospice benefit of some sort. Some people pay privately for hospice, and some hospices, most hospices donate some of their services if someone is not able to pay. So the ability to pay is not a barrier. Now, hospices can't, do that 100%. And so there's a lot of, resourcing if a hospice has hit its limit, but every hospice that I have been in contact with or worked for does take some hospice patients pro bono, so that is not a barrier to them receiving services. So we talked a little bit ago, I talked a little bit ago about how to make sure that the person that is making decisions for you is the one that is looked to at the important time, and basically how you make your needs known at the end of life. So in Texas, there's no living will, but instead there's a group of documents called advance directives. One of the documents is called a directive to physicians, and these are forms that you can get from the web, from the state of Texas, and from your healthcare providers as well. Every time you go to a hospital or to the doctor, they usually ask you about that, and they can provide you with those forms. The first one is a directive to physicians, and that's where you get to spell out, this is what I want, and this is what I don't want. I want a feeding tube, I don't want a feeding tube, or I want a feeding tube for 6 months, and if it's not working, I want that to go. I don't want to be put on a vent, or I do, or any kind of combination of those things. That's where you get to set that forward. The medical power of attorney, that designates who's going to make decisions for you when you can't. So sometimes that is the person that you would think, your spouse, your child, your parents, whatever. And sometimes you might think, if I choose that person, are they going to carry out what I want when I can't speak for myself? And sometimes that's a heavy burden to put on your spouse or your children. And so sometimes that medical power of attorney is someone other than that. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's, a lawyer, or, something like that. But it's someone that you should trust, be able to trust to carry out your wishes. And absent a medical power of attorney, it does go to, there is a legal, following of where that would go. So for instance, if you have a spouse, they would get to make your decisions. If you don't have a spouse, your children. If you don't have children, your parents. If none of those are in your picture, then it's your next closest relative. And if you have children, it is the majority of the reasonably available children. So they all, the ones that they can get in touch with have to agree. The majority of them have to agree. The third document is a DNR, do not resuscitate order. And all that says is that if you die, if your heart stops, if you stop breathing, they will not do anything to bring you back. It doesn't mean that they are not going to do anything they can to keep you comfortable. You will get oxygen, you will get, any kinds of medicine that you need. All it's saying is that if your heart stops, if you stop breathing, they will not try to bring you back. So for these documents, you do not need a notary, but that is an option. It's an easier option for some if there's a notary, because without a notary, you need 2 witnesses for each of those documents. One witness can be any competent adult, but the other witness has to be unrelated by blood or marriage, not providing care, and not have a financial interest in the medical decision. So, so you'd have to find 2 people to do that. Now, none of these documents are valid until you are not able to speak for yourself. So if you have been deemed by a physician to be mentally incompetent, or if you're unconscious. So otherwise, you can say what you want, and you can always rip them up. They're always revocable until you are incompetent or can't speak for yourself.